4 weeks later, he received the Congressional Medal of Honor. He passed that flag to a Baltimorean, Christian Fleetwood, who was a highly educated man. He went to what is now Lincoln University. He had traveled the world, been to Sierra Leone, Liberia. His parents had made friends with the sugar barons of Baltimore, and he had founded a magazine, a literary magazine, called the Lyceum, which was the premier magazine of black literature in the Upper South. And so when he was recruited to the 4th United States Colored Troops because of his outstanding education, he was made a sergeant. And at the Battle of Chapin Farms on that day, he was the master sergeant. So Alfred Hilton passed him the national colors and passed the regimental colors to Charles Veal. The whole body of troops, the 4th United States Colored Troops, having the color guard killed, fell back. Fleetwood and Veal waved the flags, rallied the survivors, and then they assaulted the Palisades. They assaulted the abatis. They climbed. They shot, they fought, and they died. And William H. Brown from St. Mary's County was shot through the leg. James H. Harris and William Brown were the first 2 men to climb the Palisades and engage in hand-to-hand combat. And because of the Battle of Chapin Farms, these 3 Marylanders received the Congressional Medal of Honor. They cracked the outer defenses of Richmond and led precipitously to the fall of the Confederacy and the death of slavery as we remember it. William H. Brown was a member of the Navy, the United States Navy, and he received his Congressional Medal of Honor at the Battle of Mobile Bay. He was nominated for the Congressional Medal of Honor by Admiral Farragut. Admiral Farragut at the Battle of Mobile Bay was trying to break into a heavily fortified harbor and to attack the largest ironclad of the war, the Tennessee, which they did successfully. And Admiral Farragut was tied off to the main mast, leading from the front, tied off to the main mast so he could look down. And the lead vessel in that attack was the Brooklyn. And Mr. Brown was in the powder magazine on the Brooklyn. So his job was to pass the gunpowder and the shells together to the artillery. One wrong spark and he would have been destroyed physically. None of him would have survived. So what Admiral Farragut noticed was, as the Tennessee was firing very accurately at the Brooklyn, the lead vessel, he twice cleared the decks of the shell whips, the men passing the shells. And what did William H. Brown do? He, along with some of his fellow sailors, went to the dead and wounded and stacked them neatly on the deck and went back to work, passing shells and powder. The Tennessee was so massive, had such thick iron, that several Union vessels attempted to ram it, one of which virtually sank because it could do nothing with the massive ship. But ultimately, the Battle of Mobile Bay, if we all remember our high school history, is a point at which Admiral Farragut called out, forgive me, Pastor, "Damn the torpedoes straight ahead." So at that point, all 18 vessels were in formation. And an ironclad, Union ironclad broke formation, that was Tecumseh. And the Tecumseh promptly hit a mine, blew up, and 60 men died in a minute. They all died on the spot, and that's when Farragut said, "Damn the torpedoes straight ahead." And Admiral Farragut followed the Brooklyn and David N. Brown into battle and into history. A very local man, Mr. Decatur Dorsey, received the Congressional Honor for the Battle of the Crater. Decatur Dorsey had a wife who lived in Sykesville. He lived alternately in Carroll and Frederick counties. He was born a slave of the then Dorsey family, which were land barons who didn't own a few acres. They owned square miles of Maryland. And Decatur Dorsey was at the Battle of the Crater. And the Battle of the Crater was a complete disaster for the Union. It was the bloodiest day of the siege of Petersburg. Glory, the movie, depicts the Battle of Fort Wagner, which lasted 36 hours. The siege of Petersburg lasted 10 months. And what happened was the Union tunneled underneath the Confederate works and put in an enormous pile of gunpowder. Detonated the gunpowder in a crater bigger than this church and cemetery was opened up. And several regiments of white troops were sent in, but their commanding officer, Colonel Leslie, failed to give them ladders. So they couldn't climb the walls of mud on the other side. Colonel Leslie spent the entire battle in a bomb-proof, a shelter, drinking peach brandy. General Grant came upon the scene after the battle and fired him on the spot. We are surprised that Grant did not shoot him himself. But this was a complete disaster. 3 regiments of white troops, 3,000 men were lost. They were in this pit. There was no escape. They could look up 50 feet. At the top of that hill, Confederate reinforcements kept coming and coming and coming. Decatur Dorsey and 2 black regiments were sent in to try and retrieve the situation to save 3,000 of their fellow soldiers. And what did Decatur Dorsey do? He went ahead of his regiment, ran around the edge of the crater, and planted his flag upon some intact fortifications of the rebel army. He ran back to his regiment, pointed to where his flag was, and said, "Charge." Charge. They charged successfully. They captured that wing of the defenses, captured 200 Confederate troops, and in a day of humiliating and nearly total defeat of the Union Army, Decatur Dorsey saved the reputation of the Union Army as a fighting force that day because he led a successful counterattack. After they had captured battle flags and the prisoners, more Confederate reinforcements kept coming and coming and coming. They were still on the low ground. The Confederates were on top and could shoot down anybody they chose. And so they could not maintain the field, but they retreated. Some of us remember in history the Battle of Fort Pillow and the dark reputation Nathan Bedford Forrest